Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. It's November, 1772, right in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The nights are getting really sharp, and you've got this weathered wooden house just struggling to keep out that biting autumn cold. Inside, a 65-year-old woman is gathering her grandchildren around the hearth. Today, we're exploring the extraordinary, entirely true memoir of Eunice Seaver. This is a profound story of survival, resilience, and colonial life, told not from, the grand halls of power, but directly from the family hearth. This incredible historical framework, a 65-year-old grandmother sitting down to share her untold life with her grandkids, is exactly what grounds this deeply human story of survival in colonial America. Eunice actually implores her grandchildren, saying, "Come closer to the fire, children. These things die with the last person who remembers them." Think about how much history is just permanently lost simply because ordinary folks don't write it down. Eunice's story isn't about famous politicians or generals. It's the rich, untold life of a woman who birthed 9 children, survived a war, and navigated the relentless everyday realities of early America. Chapter 1, Coastal Beginnings to Inland Farms. As a young woman, Eunice experienced a massive environmental and cultural shift, and this brilliantly illustrates the contrast. She was born in Marblehead in 1707, so her childhood was totally dominated by this wild, ocean-facing world. We're talking the smell of salt, fish, tar, bare rock ledges, and a busy harbor filled with crying gulls. But then, in 1726, she married Robert Seaver, a steady bricklayer and husbandman. She traded that expansive ocean horizon for the inland quiet of Framingham and Sudbury, green meadows, the winding river, and working the land. She really grounded herself in this slow, relentless agricultural life that they built together. Over the next 2.5 decades, her life was pretty much defined by the sheer physical and logistical feat of colonial motherhood. Between their firstborn, Joseph, arriving in 1727, and her 9th and final child, John, born in 1752, Eunice managed a massive household. She faced the joy of a daughter named Thankful in 1731, but also the crushing and sadly all too common colonial reality of losing her little girl Hannah. Managing 9 children over 25 years meant constantly feeding, clothing, and guiding a sprawling family against the really harsh backdrop of early America. Chapter 2, Economics of Colonial Survival. So, how did a family this size actually survive those financial pressures? Well, it required Robert to really navigate the confusing, sometimes perilous early real estate market and colonial economy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the wild inflation it shows. Robert buys 100 acres in 1737 for £500 in what they called old tenor bills, and then he sells the exact same land 3 years later for just £75 in new tenor bills. It looks like a huge loss, right? But it wasn't. Paper money was losing its value so incredibly fast that governments had to keep issuing new currency. In a world where the cash in your pocket could literally become worthless overnight, physical land remained the only true security. But amid all that cold, hard economics, you get these flashes of deep, enduring humanity. In 1740, Robert's father deeded him 5 acres of meadowland. On the legal document, right alongside all the dry legalese, his father wrote that the land was given for many good causes and considerations, and especially in fatherly love and affection. Contrast that with the complex currency maneuvers we just talked about. For working-class men like Robert, guys who really didn't express sentiment out loud very often, these rare acts of documented affection were quietly but profoundly treasured. Chapter 3, The Crucible of War. But of course, that relative stability of the 1730s wouldn't last. In 1745, global conflicts spilled right over into colonial homes. Specifically, we're talking about the Louisburg expedition during King George's War. This was a grueling military campaign where Massachusetts men were drafted to besiege a massive French stone fortress on Cape Breton Island, basically to secure British Empire interests. Now, regardless of the broader geopolitical chess game going on between the British and the French, the fact is the personal cost of these imperial decisions fell directly, squarely onto the shoulders of ordinary colonial families. Eunice sums up her absolute lack of agency during this whole turbulent time with this powerful, unforgettable line: "Empires do not much consult the wives of bricklayers when they make their decisions." It really hits hard, doesn't it? When massive global conflicts ripped husbands and sons away from their farms, women like Eunice had absolutely no say. They could literally only watch their loved ones march off and just pray for their safe return.
And the toll on her family was absolutely devastating. In 1745, her 42-year-old husband Robert, her 17-year-old son Joseph, and her 16-year-old son Benjamin all went to war. Eunice stayed behind, waiting for a husband and 2 young men to return. Ultimately, the French fortress did fall to the colonial forces. Robert and Joseph came back, but young Benjamin, he never came home. Her 16-year-old boy gave his life for the colony on that expedition, leaving a permanent aching scar on the family's history.
Chapter 4, Fire and the Frontier. Let's move to and see how this builds into the next devastating chapter of her life.
As Eunice noted, the troubles of a life are not evenly spaced. Sometimes they come all at once. The family had barely finished grieving for Louisbourg when October 1748 brought absolute catastrophe. In a single night, their Sudbury house burned entirely to the ground. Just imagine standing outside in the biting autumn cold, looking up. Eunice vividly remembered the sky above the flames being incredibly clear and full of stars. This strangely peaceful sky, while every single physical thing they owned below turned to ash. 22 years of marriage, their savings, their bonds, all their substance, just completely gone.
Left with practically nothing, Robert petitioned the General Court for relief, explicitly bringing up his and his son's military service at Louisbourg. And what did the court grant them to rebuild their lives? Look at this painfully small number, £3 and 15 shillings. It was something, sure, but it was nowhere near enough to replace what was lost. It just painfully highlights the incredibly harsh financial reality of having to start over from absolute scratch in the mid-1700s.
So with nothing left in Sudbury, the family made a desperate move. In late 1750, Robert bought a lot in the raw frontier township of Westminster for £60. By the following spring, they were literally carving a life out of the wilderness, raising a house frame, fencing acres, clearing raw frontier land. But just as they were establishing this new foothold, tragedy struck yet again. After just one winter on the frontier, Robert died suddenly in the summer of 1752. And because he died intestate, meaning without a will, Eunice suddenly faced widowhood while simultaneously bearing the massive legal burden of administering his completely unsettled estate.
So the crucial point is, the devastation of his sudden passing is perfectly captured by a single number: 4,000. When the probate officials came to tally Robert's estate, they recorded 4,000 bricks that Robert had made himself but had not yet laid. It is such a powerful, heartbreaking metaphor for an interrupted working-class life. He was a builder, and his final project was just left unfinished on a frontier hillside.
The rest of his 1752 probate inventory totaled a modest £106. But try not to look at this as just dry data. It's really the poignant physical summary of a yeoman bricklayer's entire existence. You've got oxen, cows, calves, and a horse to work the land. Hay, a plow, 3,000 shingles to build a roof. Bedding, pewter and wooden plates, the family Bible, old axes, and exactly 2 mason's trowels. He died with 2 trowels and 4,000 unlaid bricks to show for a lifetime of relentless labor. The estate's debts actually outweighed the total value, leaving Eunice the grueling task of selling off their frontier land just to settle the accounts.
Chapter 5. A Legacy of Rebuilding. It took her 3 long years to close the door on that painful chapter in Westminster and bring her younger children back to Sudbury. By December 1755, having navigated this incredible legal maze to settle her husband's estate, she formally joined the First Parish Church of Sudbury. But for Eunice, joining the church wasn't just an act of religious faith. It was a fierce, defiant declaration of survival and stability. After losing her son to a global war, watching her home burn to ash, and burying her husband on a frontier hillside, putting her name in that church record was her way of planting a flag in the ground. It was her declaring to the world, "This is where I mean to stay." Which brings us to a really provocative question for all of us today. When the fire comes, what will you build from the ashes? Eunice Seaver's philosophy on resilience was forged in the harshest of colonial fires. Her husband, and honestly Eunice herself, were builders. They built things to last, and when those things burned or broke, they simply built again. Because really, what else can any of us do? It really makes you reflect on what we and our modern generations will leave behind, and whose memories we are actively keeping alive. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep building, and we'll catch you next time.